One of the things that we, a strategist struggle with is differentiating time frames. And you've laid out why we might have over the short run or medium run a growth kind of disappointment. Governments that don't spend enough, and maybe we've gone too excited about the potential for growth. But you do have a view about longer term what this kind of regime shift means
Yeah.
and how you should set up your portfolios. And I'd love to hear that. And I'd also love to hear you have a theory about what's going to happen or potentially could happen in Europe with the green bonds and them issuing, in essence, green bonds out of thin air, meaning you don't need to borrow from it and you just spend without worrying about the deficits, and how maybe that might be the trigger for this next wave of growth higher.
Yeah. So, you have this regime that we're in at the moment, this kind of stop-start, reopening, not reopening, COVID's accelerating, COVID's slowing. And that's given you these mini cycles in value versus growth and in rates. I think if you're looking at the kind of longer term super cycle, so we come out of this crisis, we have central banks that maybe are prepared to take more risk with inflation. The Volcker regime is gone. Central banks actually want inflation to overshoot for a bit. And you have governments that will embrace a more activist fiscal policy. Once they realize that the inflation they're getting is not sustained, I think governments come back in and will take a much more active role. So you effectively have fiscal and monetary policy, which wants to run the economy hotter. And I think that type of environment is very different from the one that we had in the 2010s. And if you think about, what defined the 2010s, where you had this kind of perma-zero interest rate, and you had the massive outperformance of growth over value. And, you can look at this data back to the 1940s. Sometimes you can get that data back 300 years, and you never see that kind of trend. You never see that kind of consistent outperformance of growth over value. So, if we're in a world where governments are going to run their economies hotter, interest rates are going to start to trend higher, you have a kind of inflection point in yields, I think that secular stagnation world of just growth continuously destroying value, I think that ends. And I think you have a world where you can start to think about value again, and something like stock picking starts to become fashionable again, rather than just buying big tech companies on the basis that you're discounting their earnings at zero forever. And so I think it gives you a different type of market regime. Here we're talking about a 5-10 year period. We're not talking about the next 6 months because, as I said, COVID is still here and it's still causing disruption.